The scent of white roses reached me before I even opened my eyes. Like the whole morning had been dipped in perfume and expectation. Cedar Hollow Vineyard was bright outside the windows, sunlight glazing the vines until they looked unreal. On the lawn, chairs sat in perfect rows, facing an arch wrapped in cream blooms. Everything was flawless on purpose. And I kept telling myself this was what salvation looked like. Not heaven, not a miracle, just stability. A life where I could stop calculating, stop apologizing, stop holding my breath. A life where my son could breathe without me hovering like a shadow. Noah was 6, small in his navy suit, all long eyelashes and stubborn courage. He acted fearless until his chest tightened, until the air turned sharp and thin, and then he'd look for me like I was oxygen. His inhaler lived in my clutch. I checked it the way other brides check their rings. Tessa Morgan moved through the bridal suite like a one-woman emergency crew. Best friend, maid of honor, human shield. She kept the schedule in her head and the panic out of mine. Smoothing a wrinkle, redirecting a vendor, blocking anyone who tried to pull me into a conversation I couldn't survive. Every time she glanced at me, it felt like a silent question. I answered with a practiced smile. My dress hung from an antique wardrobe, ivory silk and lace layered like a promise. I stared at it and tried to believe the promise. Thomas Dawson wasn't in the room, but my father was everywhere anyway. His assistants had been in and out since dawn. Security had checked the grounds. His guests were arriving, the kind of people who treated weddings like alliances. He loved Noah, but I still felt his legacy sitting on my shoulders like a coat I didn't know how to wear. And then there was Grant Whitmore, the man waiting at the altar. He was confident, the kind of man who made strangers lean in. When he looked at me, I felt chosen. When he talked about the future, I let myself believe I could stop surviving and start living. I told myself I wasn't marrying him for money, but I also knew what it felt like to wake up at 3 a.m. and wonder if Noah's cough was getting worse, if the next urgent care visit would wreck our budget, if I could keep being strong forever. Grant's world promised safety. Together with my father's protection, it looked like a door finally opening. Noah climbed onto the couch and swung his feet, touching my veil like he needed proof it was real. I went to him, lowering myself carefully, feeling the tightness of my corset and the familiar tightness of responsibility in my chest. I smoothed his hair, tucked his collar, and pressed my forehead to his for a second. I let the quiet warmth of him steady me. I promised myself, the way I always did, that no matter what happened today, I would not gamble with his well-being. The minutes tightened. Photos, hairpins. A last-minute adjustment to the seating chart. Tessa intercepting my father's assistant before she could drag me into another detail. The vineyard humming with movement, like a machine meant to deliver me down an aisle on time. When the photographer finally left and the room went still, I asked for 1 minute alone, just to breathe, just to anchor myself before the music started. I slipped into the hallway, air brushing my arms, the carpet swallowing my steps. Framed vineyard photos lined the walls. My pulse felt loud in my ears. I passed the door to the groom's study, and I slowed without meaning to. Grant's voice came through the wall, low and intimate, wrapped in the kind of soothing calm you use when you're trying to keep someone from crying. It wasn't the nervous pre-wedding energy I expected. It wasn't excited. It sounded private. It sounded practiced. My stomach dropped, a sharp warning. My hand hovered near the doorframe, and even though every part of me wanted to walk away, I leaned closer, choosing to listen 1 more second. Grant's voice slid through the shared wall, low and steady, and it stopped me mid-step. I was in a service hallway at Cedar Hollow Vineyard in Virginia, away from the bridal suite and the smiling faces. I told myself it was normal. Grant Whitmore was probably handling logistics, calming a nervous groomsman, fixing something small. My brain clung to that because I needed today to mean what I'd promised myself it would mean. Stability. Safety. A future where my 6-year-old, Noah, could just be a kid, not the boy who kept track of his inhaler like it was a second heartbeat. My dress felt heavier the longer I stood there. The bodice held my ribs tight. I should have been with Noah and Tessa Morgan, letting her smooth my veil while Noah asked his questions. Instead, I leaned closer to the vent. The tone was wrong. Grant didn't sound like a man making quick calls before walking down the aisle. He sounded intimate, careful, soothing, like he was talking to someone whose feelings mattered in a way that had nothing to do with schedules. My throat tightened. Heat rushed into my face and then disappeared, leaving me cold. I pressed my fingertips to the wall, anchoring myself. I couldn't hear the other voice clearly, just hints swallowed by drywall. But I heard Grant's pauses, The soft way he lowered his voice, the patience threaded through every word. I told myself I was imagining it. I was a single mom. I was trained to expect the bottom to drop. Maybe I was inventing danger because I didn't know how to rest inside something pretty. Then he said a name. Vanessa Cole. It wasn't the name of the planner. It wasn't a cousin. It was a full name, spoken slowly, like it belonged to someone he knew well. My stomach turned hard. My hands went numb. For a second, the hallway tilted, and the white of my sleeves looked too bright, too unreal. I wanted to back away. I wanted to walk fast toward the bridal suite and let Tessa's face tell me I was overthinking. I wanted Noah's little hand to ground me, but I stayed. I bargained with reality instead. Vanessa could be a client. Grant worked in finance. Names and deals were constant. I'd watched him take late calls with that same calm voice, then turn toward me like I was his home. I told myself this was business, nothing more. My body didn't buy it, because right after he said Vanessa's name, his voice softened further, and he used the phrase, my love. Not like a joke, not like a polite habit, like comfort, like belonging. That phrase had been a lifeline for me on the nights Noah's breathing scared me, and the mornings I showed up smiling. It had sounded like someone was finally holding the edge of the world with me. Hearing it aimed at someone else felt like something inside me tearing, quiet but final. I forced myself to breathe the way I coached Noah when his chest tightened. Slow in, slow out. Don't panic. Don't make a sound. The hallway felt too narrow. My dress suddenly more cage than celebration. My eyes dropped to my ring. It caught the light and looked cold. Grant's tone shifted again, and for a heartbeat I hoped I'd misunderstood everything. Then I heard him dismiss the ceremony, reducing it to something practical. He called it a transaction. My mind tried to translate the word into something safe. Paperwork, a deal, a formality, because I grew up around my father, Thomas Dawson, where contracts were always just tools. But the word hit my body wrong, like stepping onto a stair that isn't there. I stayed pressed to the wall anyway, silent and shaking, choosing to listen one more second, because this wasn't just nerves and I needed to know now what came next. The word transaction kept echoing, and then the rest of his meaning unfolded like a blueprint I was never meant to see. Grant kept talking in that steady cadence, the one he used when he wanted people to relax while he steered them. Through the vent I caught fragments: boardroom shorthand, voting rights, proxy control, leverage, merger. My stomach dropped with each term, because I knew those words. I grew up around Dawson Media. I'd watched my father, Thomas Dawson, listen to men speak in phrases that decided careers. Grant wasn't describing a wedding. He was describing an access point. He spoke about my father's structure like it was a puzzle he'd already solved. How control didn't sit in one place. How it could be gathered quietly through signatures and timing. How the right spouse could hold proxy votes without looking like a threat. I wasn't the prize in his plan. I was the disguise. The front. My memories started reordering themselves, fast and brutal. The night he first met my dad, he'd been charming in that effortless way that made everyone lean in. Later, in bed, he'd asked what my father really wanted, what kept him up at night, how the company protected itself. I'd called it interest. I'd told myself it was sweet that Grant cared about where I came from. Then he asked about shares. Not greedy, not obvious. More like curiosity dressed as admiration. He'd wondered how voting worked, who held what, how board decisions were made. I answered because I wanted him to feel included. I wanted him to see me as more than a single mom who kept an inhaler in her purse. And then there was the prenup. People like my father treated paperwork like oxygen. Grant acted relieved when the lawyers arrived, like a man who respected boundaries. Then, so gently it felt like love, he suggested a clause about unity. A small line about shared voting rights in certain situations, framed as trust, a way to show our families we were building something together. Now I heard the real shape of that clause. It wasn't romance. It was a lever. Grant's tone softened again, intimate and certain, like he was calming Vanessa while laying out steps. I heard enough to understand the timeline. Marry me. Let the merger talk begin under the warmth of family. Let my father relax into the idea that his daughter was protected. Use the honeymoon glow and the photos to lock in confidence. Then, once the ties were tangled too tightly to unwind cleanly, file for divorce in 1 to 2 years. An exit plan. Like I was a contract with an end date. My chest went hollow. The hallway smelled of lilies and wood polish, and suddenly it made me nauseous. My ears rang. My dress, which had felt like silk armor, became dead weight. I looked down at my ring and saw it differently. Not a promise, a receipt. For a second, I wanted to fold against the wall and let grief take over. But my body didn't give me that luxury. It gave me Noah. It gave me the sound of his small breath at night, the memory of counting inhaler puffs like prayers. It gave me my father's tired eyes when he thought I wasn't looking, the weight of a legacy he'd built. Grant wasn't just taking my heart. He was reaching for my child's stability and my father's life's work. The dread hardened into something sharper. Rage, yes, but also focus. I couldn't afford a scene without proof. If I ran, Grant could rewrite the story. He could paint me as overwhelmed, dramatic, unstable. He could maneuver behind the curtains while I tried to hold Noah together in the wreckage. I stepped back from the wall, my hands trembling, and forced air into my lungs. The music outside would swell any minute. People would start turning their heads toward the aisle, and I was standing in a corridor with a secret that could blow up 2 families. I needed an ally. I needed Tessa. And I needed something solid, something undeniable. Before Grant realized his perfect bride had heard the plan, I backed away from the wall like it had teeth. The corridor outside the groom's suite was cool and quiet compared to the bridal rooms, and that calm made my panic feel louder. I gathered my skirt with one fist so no one could see my knees wobble. Downstairs, guests laughed over clinking glasses, like the day was already decided. Tessa Morgan stood at the end of the hallway with a clipboard and a phone, directing people with that steady confidence I've leaned on since we were teenagers. When she saw me, she didn't ask if I was okay. Her eyes narrowed and locked onto mine. She knew the difference between wedding jitters and devastation. I tried to speak and failed. The words caught behind my tongue. My hands shook so hard the beading on my sleeve trembled. My breath stayed shallow, trapped by the bodice, and the smell of roses on my skin suddenly felt too sweet. Tessa stepped in close and angled her body to block the hallway, turning us into a private corner. What I gave her came out in pieces. Grant Whitmore on the phone in a tone that didn't belong to a groom. A woman's name, Vanessa Cole, said with a softness that made my stomach drop. Then the word that shattered the last illusion, transaction. He wasn't talking about vows like promises. He was talking about them like paperwork. And then the colder layer, the one my mind understood before my heart could. Proxy control, voting rights, leverage, a merger disguised as a marriage. Grant using me as the front door to my father, Thomas Dawson, and to Dawson Media's control structure. An exit plan. A divorce in 1-2 years. Once the financial ties were locked so tight I couldn't undo them cleanly. Tessa's face shifted from shock into a fury so quiet it felt like ice. I could see her replaying what she'd tried not to name. How Grant lit up when my dad's name came up. How he asked curious questions about shares and board votes. How he pushed that prenup clause and called it trust. She stayed supportive because she wanted me happy, because she saw Noah finally laughing more than coughing. My first instinct was to run. To find Noah, make sure his inhaler was still tucked in my clutch, and disappear before the music started. But running would hand Grant a perfect story. Me unstable, him patient. My father would be humiliated. Noah would watch me flee. I felt something harden under the panic. I refused to disappear. I told Tessa I wasn't leaving Cedar Hollow today. If Grant wanted a ceremony, I would give him one. But I would walk down that aisle with my eyes open. I would expose him. Then reality hit. Without proof, he would deny everything. He would smile, twist the story, and let the room decide I was hysterical. I needed something concrete, something my father could act on. Tessa went practical instantly. She started thinking about where Grant would be careless. A phone left open, a laptop in the study, a call log, an email thread, a recording app he forgot to close. She could create a diversion and search for evidence. I could pull my father into a private space and give him facts, not heartbreak. From the courtyard, the string quartet began to tune, soft notes rising like a countdown. There was no time to collapse. Somewhere a coordinator called for the bridal party, and footsteps rushed past us. I felt the weight of my ring like a receipt on my finger. Tessa's grip stayed firm, a silent promise that she'd fight beside me. I nodded once, tasting iron, and moved right then. Tessa squeezed my hands until the shaking steadied, and we split in opposite directions, moving fast and silent, the ceremony seconds away and the plan locked in. The first notes of the quartet drifted down the corridor, so wrong, like the day was still innocent. Staff rushed by with programs and radios, smiling to keep the machine running, my dress pressed into my ribs. Time was moving, whether I could keep up or not. I found my father near the patio doors beneath greenery-wrapped beams. Thomas Dawson looked like the man the public trusted. Calm, proud, steady, the head of Dawson Media accepting congratulations about legacy and family. I couldn't let him stay in that version of himself. I touched his sleeve and guided him away into a small anteroom that smelled like linen and lemon cleaner. The door shut, muting the vineyard's laughter and the guests settling outside. My throat wanted to collapse. My heart wanted to spill everywhere. But I forced myself into facts, because facts were my father's language. I kept my voice flat, like a report. In my clutch, Noah's inhaler bumped my fingers, a plastic reminder that I don't get to collapse. I have to protect what depends on me today. Somewhere down the hall, I pictured him blinking up at strangers, trusting I'd come back. I told him what I overheard. Grant Whitmore on the phone, voice low and soothing in a way that didn't fit the morning. I told him the name Vanessa Cole, and how my body recognized intimacy before my mind could argue it away. I told him Grant reduced the ceremony to a transaction, like a deal being closed. Then I told him the part that mattered most. This wasn't just cheating, it was a plan. Proxy control, voting rights, leverage. Grant using me as the clean front to reach my father's influence inside Dawson Media. My father's face changed in real time. The proud dad drained away and the CEO snapped into place, the man who could smell a hostile takeover. He didn't need a lecture. I watched him replay the last months. Grant's careful curiosity about share structure, questions about board seats and voting blocks, the way he pushed for a specific prenup clause and called it unity, trust, protection. My father had answered some of those questions, thinking he was welcoming a future son-in-law. Now he heard the pattern. Guilt flashed through him quick and honest. He'd felt unease and swallowed it because he wanted me happy, and he wanted Noah safe. That swallowed unease turned into something colder. Protective anger aimed at Grant, and at himself for letting proximity become access. The room felt tight with unsaid grief. I didn't ask for comfort. I didn't have time to fall apart. My father moved straight into risk and control. He knew what Grant would do if we confronted him without proof. Deny, charm, pivot, and frame me as unstable, a stressed bride making accusations. He would weaponize my emotion to protect his strategy. So my father made the only call that mattered proof first. Evidence that tied Vanessa Cole to Grant, and tied Grant to proxy voting control, to the transaction mindset, to the 1-2-year exit. He also understood the public stage we were standing on. If we detonated this in the aisle, Grant might still win the narrative. A controlled response would corner him harder than a scene. I felt my ring like a receipt. My father steadied me with his gaze, the way he always did when the world got loud. He wanted my face composed, my posture calm. He wanted me to buy minutes, keep the flow moving just long enough for Tessa to find something undeniable. When I reached for the door, the music swelled again, closer now, like a countdown. Somewhere out there, Tessa was already hunting for proof, and I stepped back into the corridor wearing a calm mask that didn't belong to me, because my father was right. We needed evidence before we gave Grant a chance to lie. The prelude music kept swelling in soft waves through Cedar Hollow Vineyard, like the whole place was breathing and counting down. Each restart felt like a shove toward the aisle. I moved through the back corridor with my shoulders squared and my face composed, because panic would show before tears ever did. Inside, my mind ran like a stopwatch. Proof, not suspicions, not my trembling voice. Proof that could survive a room full of guests and a man skilled at turning chaos into a story where I looked unstable. Tessa went first. I caught her in brief flashes, bouquet in hand, hairpins catching the light, playing the maid of honor who could solve anything. She pulled the planner and 2 staff members toward the bridal suite with a believable crisis, clearing the hallway near Grant's study. My father stayed close but not smothering. Thomas Dawson had the kind of quiet authority that made people straighten without realizing. A coordinator glanced at him and instantly returned to their tasks. He bought me seconds by simply being there. I spent those seconds like oxygen. Behind me, the coordinator's movements felt louder than they should have. Clipboards tapping, radios chirping, heels on wood. Every time someone said my name in passing, I felt my nerves flare, certain they could see the truth on my face. I kept reminding myself, breathe, blink, smile, buy time, protect Noah, and keep your voice steady. Grant's study door sat half-closed at the end of a short hall. I kept my hands folded like a bride should and let my eyes track movement. Evidence had to be simple. An email thread, a calendar invite, a merger deck, a draft term sheet, a call log with Vanessa Cole's number and the right timestamp. Tessa slipped inside when the corridor finally emptied. I stayed by a console table and pretended to adjust my veil. My dress felt heavier by the second, the bodice tight around my ribs. I pictured Noah's inhaler in my clutch and forced myself into focus. I couldn't afford to crumble, not with his small lungs depending on me. A staff member turned the corner carrying champagne flutes. My heart kicked, then steadied when they rushed past. A groomsman wandered in, eyes on his phone. My father redirected him with one silent gesture toward the patio. The hall cleared again. Then Tessa appeared, eyes sharp, motioning for me to come closer without making it obvious. Inside the study, Grant's workstation was open, as if privacy was guaranteed just because he expected it. The arrogance made my stomach flip. A laptop glowed on the desk. A second monitor showed a folder window, and I recognized the cold language I'd overheard. Board structure, voting percentages, files labeled with Dawson Media. But the strongest proof wasn't a document. A recording panel sat on the screen in plain sight, the kind of meeting recorder tool executives use for notes and compliance. An audio file was queued with today's date, and a start time that made my skin go numb. It lined up with the minutes when I realized my wedding was being treated like leverage. Tessa didn't hack anything. She didn't need to. The file was already there, already cloud-saved, because Grant had set his own system to remember for him. I watched her export the recording and copy it to a tiny USB drive from her emergency kit. A transfer confirmation blinked on screen, clean and final. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press my fingers into my skirt. Outside, the music swelled again, louder now. Footsteps gathered. The ceremony was starting. Tessa slipped the USB into my palm. I closed my hand around it, small and sharp against my skin, and something inside me went cold and steady. I lifted my chin, put my calm face back on, and walked toward the aisle with a weapon hidden in my clutch. The moment the USB drive hit the bottom of my clutch, my life split into two scenes. The one everyone could see, and the one only I could feel. I stepped out of the hallway and into sunlight so bright it made the white of my dress look unreal. Cedar Hollow Vineyard was flawless rows of vines, an arbor wrapped in cream roses, guests turning toward the aisle. My body wanted to run. My mind gave me one rule: mask on. I moved like a bride is supposed to move, careful, as if fabric and schedule were my only problems. Inside, every nerve was counting down. The string quartet played something soft and sweet, the kind of music that tells people they're safe. I kept my lips curved in something that passed for calm. I kept my shoulders back. I told myself I wasn't here to be adored. I was here to stay steady long enough to trap a liar with his own words. Near the front row, I found Noah. He sat in a tiny suit, curls already trying to spring free. His inhaler pouch rested in his lap, fingers tapping the zipper in that anxious rhythm I knew too well. That pouch was our truth. My life had never been about romance first. It had always been about breathing, about making sure a 6-year-old boy got through the day without fear. Noah glanced up and caught my eyes. His face brightened, trusting, unaware of the storm under my skin. I gave him a tiny nod that meant, "I'm here, I've got you," even if my heart felt like it was splitting in silence. My father stood close enough to steady me without touching. Thomas Dawson looked like the proud dad everyone expected, but I could see the CEO underneath, watching the room like it was a board meeting. He wasn't sentimental today. He was alert. Tessa hovered a few steps back, bouquet in hand, chin lifted, the kind of calm that comes from fury turned into focus. If anyone stared, they'd just see the maid of honor doing her job. I knew better. She was my witness. She was my shield. The coordinator's subtle signals pulled me toward the staging point. The music shifted, fuller now. Guests rose. My dress tightened as I drew a breath, and my clutch felt heavier with proof. And then my attention snagged on someone I didn't recognize. A man in a black suit stood slightly apart from the easy clusters of guests, too still for a celebration. He wasn't chatting or smiling for cameras. He watched the space with a quiet, practiced focus, tracking exits like he expected trouble. Dark hair, sharp posture, hands relaxed but ready. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. Not long enough to be rude, long enough to be noticed. Something in my body went quiet. Not comforted, just aware, like I'd stepped into the pull of something bigger than this wedding. Later I would learn his name was Dominic Moretti. Right then, he was only a stranger who looked like he understood danger. My ring flashed when I adjusted my grip on the bouquet. This morning it had felt like a promise. Now it felt like evidence, polished and pretty, a perfect prop in a con. My father offered his arm, and I took it. The contact was brief and steady, and it told me everything. We were not running. We were walking straight into the center of the story and turning it inside out. At the aisle threshold, the vineyard blurred at the edges. The arbor waited ahead like a frame for a perfect picture. Grant waited at the end of it, posture practiced, face arranged for devotion. I didn't walk toward love. I walked toward exposure, counting down to the moment the ceremony would invite objections and knowing my reason had teeth and a plan. The officiant's voice floated over Cedar Hollow like a blessing, and the guests leaned into it the way people lean into a happy ending. The vineyard smelled like grapes and peonies. Phones were raised. Smiles were ready. I stood beside Grant Whitmore with my bouquet held perfectly, my face arranged into bridal calm, under lace and boning. My heart slammed. My clutch pressed my hip, and the USB drive inside it felt like a stone. I found Noah in the front row. 6 years old, too serious in his small suit, his inhaler pouch strapped close. He watched me with that doctor's office focus, quiet, trusting, waiting for me to keep the world steady. That look nailed my feet to the ground. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about my child and my family's future. My father sat nearby, Thomas Dawson in the role of proud dad, but his eyes had turned sharp, measuring the room like a board meeting. Tessa stood behind me, maid of honor smile on her face, her body angled toward me like she could hold me up without anyone noticing. We looked normal. That was the strategy. The ceremony moved forward with soft, practiced sweetness. The language of forever. Grant's hand found mine on cue, polished and warm. I didn't flinch. I counted my breaths the way I did when Noah's chest tightened, because panic is loud and I needed to stay quiet inside. Then the officiant reached the moment weddings treat like tradition, the invitation for objections. I had been waiting for it like a timer ticking behind my eyes. My feet moved. I stepped slightly forward, close enough to the microphone that the speakers caught me, and my own voice came back amplified, steady, almost strange. The crowd shifted, confusion first, like a wind changing direction. I didn't start with legal terms. I started with the simplest truth. I let them know the man beside me had used the same tenderness he offered me on someone else. I described the shock of hearing it through a wall, the intimacy in his tone, the way my skin went cold because it wasn't nervous wedding energy. It was comfort meant for another woman. Faces tightened. A few guests looked at Grant, then at me, searching for an explanation that wouldn't ruin the day. I gave them the name I'd heard, Vanessa Cole. It dropped into the vineyard like broken glass, sharp, final, impossible to sweep away. Grant held his expression for a breath, then shifted into concern so practiced it felt rehearsed. I could feel the room's instinct to steady him and soften me, to decide I was overwhelmed, emotional, unstable. He didn't need to say it. His posture offered that story to everyone at once. My knees shook inside the gown. My fingers clenched around the bouquet until the stems pressed into my palm. I kept my gaze level because I refused to be reduced. Then I moved to the deeper violation. I told them I had heard him call this marriage a transaction. Not love, not family. A transaction. A step in a plan to use my last name and my father's company as leverage. That word hung in the air, ugly against roses and string music. The vineyard went quiet in a new way, alert, tense, listening. I didn't spill every detail yet. I didn't have to. The shape of it was enough. Grant trying to turn me into a door he could walk through, then lock behind him. I angled my head toward my father and Tessa, just enough to confirm they were ready. My voice stayed even as I made the final point. This wasn't a feeling, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. We had proof. I caught Noah's eyes and promised him silently. And as Tessa's hand moved toward the sound system, Grant's mask finally began to crack right before the recording could speak for me. Silence sat on the vineyard like a held breath. I could feel Grant beside me trying to reset the room with that practiced concern, the kind that makes people want to smooth things over and blame the woman in white for being too emotional. I kept my gaze forward, because I knew what was coming next. Facts don't care about charm. Tessa moved like she belonged anywhere, even in the middle of a ceremony derailing. She didn't look frantic. She looked efficient, like a nurse walking into an emergency with a tray already arranged. In her hand was a phone connected to the small sound system the planner had insisted on for the vows. One tap, one adjustment, and then the vineyard filled with Grant's own voice. Hearing him amplified in open air was different than hearing him muffled through drywall. It was clean, confident, familiar in the worst way. The recording carried his softness when he addressed Vanessa Cole, the warmth he had once used on me when Noah was sick and I was shaking with fear. That tenderness was there again, not for a bride, but for a partner in a plan. Then the tone shifted, the way it does when someone stops pretending to be human and starts being a negotiator. I heard him reduce the wedding to performance, to a transaction designed to look like devotion. I heard the ugly clarity of it. Me as the front, the public face that made the takeover palatable. He talked about proxy control and voting rights the way other men talk about honeymoon plans. He mentioned Dawson Media like it was already his, like my last name was a key he'd been holding up to the locks of my family's future. The details landed in a brutal order. First the intimacy, then the contempt for the ceremony, then the mechanics of the con. He referenced board influence, leverage, and timing, as if my life was a calendar invite, and then the part that made my stomach drop even though I already knew, the exit. He mapped out a divorce in 1-2 years, after the financial ties were locked and the paper trail made it hard to undo. He sounded pleased with himself, as if he'd solved a puzzle. The crowd reacted like a wave hitting rocks. At first there was stunned stillness, faces frozen mid-smile. Then gasps cut through the rows. Murmurs rose, sharp and disbelieving. Phones lifted higher, not to capture romance anymore, but to capture ruin. A few guests turned toward my father, searching for the adult in the room, the person who could tell them what reality was now. Grant's body betrayed him faster than his mouth could. His shoulders tightened. His jaw worked like he was trying to swallow panic. His eyes darted, looking for a place to pin control, but there was nowhere to put it. The recording kept going, and every second it played stripped another layer off his polished groom face. I watched him shrink in real time, not into regret but into calculation failing. My father stood before the recording even finished. Thomas Dawson didn't need to raise his voice. His authority cut through the noise like a clean blade. In that calm CEO cadence, he made it clear that Dawson Media would sever every tie Grant had tried to touch, that any attempted proxy maneuver would be challenged immediately, and that legal action was already in motion. I could feel the room settle around his certainty. Grant couldn't paint me as unstable when my father sounded like a boardroom closing statement. When the audio ended, the silence that followed was heavier than the first. I felt my rage burn out, leaving a strange, hollow calm. My hands were steady as I slid the ring off my finger. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt clinical, like removing a splinter before it infects you. I opened my palm and let the ring drop onto the stone at the altar. It hit once, bright and final, and I stepped back, already feeling the adrenaline drain as grief started to climb in behind my ribs, ready to take everything else too. Right there, finally. The second I turned away from the altar, the adrenaline that had been holding me upright started leaking out of my body. The vineyard was still sunlit and gorgeous, but I felt gray inside. My dress stopped feeling like silk. It felt like weight. The corset pressed my ribs so tight I couldn't get a full breath, and my hands shook hard enough that I had to clasp them together. Behind us, Cedar Hollow Vineyard buzzed with confusion. I heard chairs scraping, guests murmuring, and phones lifting. Somewhere in that mess was Grant trying to recover control, but I couldn't even focus on him. I had won the moment, and my body didn't care. My father and Tessa formed around me without a word. Thomas Dawson moved with quiet authority, shoulders squared. Tessa stayed close on my other side, steady hands, sharp eyes. They guided me off the stone aisle and onto the gravel path. The crunch under my shoes sounded too loud. Every step felt delayed, like my legs were answering late. The farther we got, the more the noise faded into a muffled roar. Staff hurried past with headsets and tense faces, pretending not to stare. Security appeared at my father's subtle signal. Not dramatic, just present, widening space, as we moved toward a villa behind the tasting room. Once the door closed, my knees gave out. I sank onto a couch and the first sob hit like it came from somewhere ancient. My throat burned. My face went hot. My chest kept catching on the tight dress, turning every breath into work. Tessa's fingers found the hidden hooks and eased the corset open just enough for air. It wasn't glamorous. It was care. The moment my lungs could finally expand, the grief poured out. I cried for the future I'd been building in my head. The stable home, the steady partner, the idea that Noah and I were finally going to be safe. In the background, my father moved between two versions of himself. I felt the CEO in him on the phone, setting legal and PR into motion, calling security into place, locking down loose ends. Then he looked at me, and the father in him showed up fully, guilt sitting heavy in his eyes. He had wanted me happy. He had let himself believe the charm because he didn't want to be the man who ruined my hope. That guilt hooked into my own shame. A part of me wanted to apologize for bringing this into his life, even though I hadn't chosen any of it. I was so used to surviving that my first instinct was still to take the blame. Then panic sliced through the grief. Noah. The thought hit like an alarm. Where was he? What had he seen? I tried to sit up too fast and the room tilted. A moment later, I saw him safe with a trusted family friend. His little suit was wrinkled, his hair messed up, and his inhaler pouch was still strapped across his chest like a seatbelt. His eyes were wide, but his breathing was steady. Relief hit me so hard it felt like pain, and I started crying again, quieter this time, holding him close while my body tried to believe what my eyes were seeing. Noah leaned into me, still real. Tessa stayed practical, wiping my cheeks and smoothing my hair back with steady hands. My father sat close enough that I could feel his presence behind me. Publicly, I had dismantled Grant. Privately, I felt broken. And still, in the same breath, I could feel what was real around me. My father's protection, Tessa's loyalty, Noah's small heartbeat against my chest. Grant had never been that kind of real. As my sobs slowed, another truth settled in, cold and unsettling. Exposure doesn't end a war. Sometimes it's the match that starts it. The villa should have felt like shelter, but the quiet made every sound too sharp. Outside, Cedar Hollow still looked like a wedding guests in stunned clusters, but in here there was only my loosened bodice, my shaky hands, and the aftertaste of Grant's voice in my head. Noah sat close enough to touch, his inhaler pouch across his chest. He kept checking the zipper, the way he did when his lungs made him nervous, like he could keep air from disappearing. I smoothed his hair and tried to believe the worst was over because the truth was public now. My father moved like two men at once. Part of him built a wall out of calls and legal steps. The other part watched doors and corners. Tessa hovered by the window, scanning the gravel path. I was just starting to feel a thin thread of calm when the day shifted again. A coordinator appeared with her headset crooked and panic hiding behind professional makeup. Her eyes flicked to Noah before snapping to my father. I didn't catch every word, but the meaning landed clean. A man had been asking around for the little boy. Not his name, not the ring bearer, the little boy. A guard mentioned someone lingering near the kids' lemonade table, watching Noah's row, then vanishing when approached. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that weddings were chaos. Then my mind replayed Grant at the altar, reaching for the crowd's sympathy like a tool. Men who weaponized perception didn't stop at humiliation. They searched for leverage, and leverage always found the softest place to press. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message that stayed vague on purpose while it implied exactly what it wanted me to imagine. Children wander, crowds make mistakes, and mothers who cause trouble learn consequences. My fingers went numb around the screen. The room narrowed to Noah's breathing. Panic hit. My body wanted to bolt, scoop Noah up, run until my lungs burned. But he was watching my face, reading me, and I couldn't hand him my fear. I pulled him into my side and forced my breath to slow, making my calm the safest thing he could touch. Movement rippled through the villa. A guard appeared in the hall. Another checked the patio doors. My father's gaze hardened, and I saw guilt flash there. He'd noticed Grant's innocent questions before and swallowed his unease because he wanted me happy. Now that restraint looked like a mistake he couldn't undo. Then I saw the man in black again. Dominic Moretti stood near the doorway like he belonged in emergencies. He didn't ask for space. He read at exits, sightlines, the coordinators shaking hands, the guards spacing, and with a few quiet gestures, people moved. Even my father's head of security shifted half a step as if Dominic's presence carried authority he recognized. I didn't know who Dominic was, but I recognized competence. He wasn't reacting. He was anticipating. My father had money, lawyers, relationships. Tonight, that all felt civilized, useful for courtrooms and headlines. Not enough for shadows that targeted children because it worked. Noah's fingers worried the inhaler pouch zipper again, and a fierce clarity burned through me. I could survive being lied to. I could survive the internet's opinions. I could not survive losing him. Dominic's calm became an offer without words. Move now, move smart. My pride wanted to resist a stranger. My motherhood didn't care about pride. I tightened my arms around Noah, met my father's eyes, and felt the decision lock into place. If corporate rules couldn't keep my son safe, I would accept protection that operated outside them. And as Dominic guided the perimeter with silent authority, and we prepared to leave Cedar Hollow under his shadow, I understood the cost. Safety would feel like a cage, and I was about to step inside it willingly. Dominic didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He didn't have to. The villa doorway at Cedar Hollow became his line, and the hallway seemed to bend around it. My father's security was trained for cameras and lawsuits. Dominic's people moved like they expected something quieter and worse. Two men in dark suits took positions without being asked. One watched the stairs. One watched the driveway. Noah pressed into my side, fingers curled around the strap of his inhaler pouch. His eyes tracked every adult face the way kids do when they feel danger but don't have language for it. I held him close and forced my breathing to stay steady. Dominic stepped closer. Not into my space, but into the space that belonged to the threat. He looked at exits the way my father looked at contracts. He scanned for timing. The offer arrived through logistics, not romance. We would leave now, and we would leave controlled right then. Then the rules followed. Not as a speech, but as limits that snapped into place. If I accepted his protection, I would not go anywhere alone. Not down a hallway, not to a restroom, not to the car. I would not post our location, not even a harmless picture of vines and sunlight, because a phone could betray you without meaning to. No unvetted visitors, even if they wore friendly faces and carried sympathy. No spontaneous detours. A controlled route out. A temporary safe place with checked doors, working cameras, and staff who answered to him. Each rule tasted like Grant's hands in my life all over again. The same tightening, the same feeling of being steered. I had just ripped myself out of a con that used marriage as a leash, and now another man was asking me to surrender freedom. The difference was Noah's heartbeat. Fear made the math brutal and simple. My father bristled. I could read it in his jaw, in the way he squared his shoulders like he was facing a hostile board. Thomas Dawson wanted to be the biggest force in any room, and he hated needing anyone. Dominic didn't challenge him. He let my father's authority exist, then quietly worked around it. I watched my father's head of security shift his stance, listening, and I knew this was a different battlefield. Tessa stayed close, her hand hovering near Noah's back as if she could shield him with skin alone. Her eyes never left Dominic. Suspicion lived in her face, but so did something practical. The recognition that we were out of our depth. She had always carried an extra plan. Now her readiness looked like permission for me to survive. Noah kept staring at Dominic, stiff and uncertain. Dominic noticed. His posture changed in a way so small I almost missed it. He angled his shoulders away and lowered his hands, softening his stance until he looked less like a wall. Noah's grip loosened by a fraction. That tiny adjustment hit me harder than any promise could have. It meant Dominic could choose gentleness, even if gentleness wasn't his default. I took a breath and made a decision I hated and needed. I didn't choose Dominic because I trusted him. I chose him because the threat had already reached for my child, and I refused to wait for a second attempt. We moved. My father's security formed a visible shell. Dominic's men formed the invisible one. A black SUV rolled up as if it had been waiting the whole time. Cedar Hollow's beauty blurred past the windows, vines and gravel and sunlight pretending nothing had changed. Inside my chest, bars were sliding into place, and I stepped forward anyway, because Noah was worth any cage. As the gates fell behind us, my stomach knotted with one clear thought. Dominic's safe place was going to show me how deep his world really went. The SUV didn't head toward the main road. It slipped out the back of Cedar Hollow Vineyard, tires whispering over gravel. My dress was gone, traded for borrowed sweats. Noah pressed into my side with his inhaler pouch in his lap, fingers worrying the zipper the way he did when he was scared. Dominic's people drove like they were allergic to patterns. We turned off the highway, then stopped under pines where another vehicle waited. Engine running. A bag moved from trunk to trunk. Seats were reassigned without a question. I climbed in because Noah's grip tightened every time we paused. We passed a checkpoint that wasn't marked as anything official. A chain across a narrow road lifted after a silent nod. At the next stop, an envelope changed hands through a cracked window, thick enough to be cash, and the exchange happened without names. The property sat back from the road behind trees. Cameras hid in places I only noticed because I forced myself to look. A second gate waited inside the first. When the car rolled through, the outside noise dulled, as if someone turned the world down to a safer volume. Inside, everything was controlled. Unmarked cars. Men posted at corners with faces I couldn't read and eyes that never stopped scanning. They watched me like something that couldn't be lost. Noah was the first to be treated like a person instead of a liability. A woman appeared with warm food, water, and a folded blanket printed with dinosaurs. She guided him to a room that smelled like fresh sheets and lemon cleaner. A stuffed dog sat on the bed, waiting. Noah's shoulders dropped in a single breath. He ate, then curled under the blanket, inhaler pouch tucked beside him like a bedtime ritual. Watching him calm down stung. He could accept safety faster than I could. A staff member led me down a hallway and redirected me when I drifted toward a window. Doors closed behind us with soft clicks that sounded polite until I realized they locked. My phone was still in my hand, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me. Someone disabled location sharing and slid it into a dark sleeve that killed the signal, as if my own device could betray us. The rules Dominic laid out weren't suggestions here. They were built into the walls. When Dominic finally stood alone with me, the air changed. Not louder, heavier. He didn't touch me, didn't crowd me, but his presence filled the room the way weather fills a horizon. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled, as if he expected trouble and had rehearsed every response. I sensed he wasn't improvising my safety. He was executing a plan. Fear rose in my throat because a man who could organize people like this could also erase them. Relief rose right beside it because certainty is a kind of shelter when your life has been nothing but shifting ground. I reminded myself I had escaped one man who tried to use me as a tool. Dominic's protection came with borders, and borders can become cages. But then I pictured Noah back at Cedar Hollow, someone asking for the little boy, and my stomach turned cold. Autonomy meant nothing if my son wasn't safe enough to breathe. Somewhere deeper in the house, I heard a door lock, then another. Dominic's people moved with the confidence of a system that had been tested, not imagined. And in that silence, I understood the dark part of safety. Once you step into a world built to control outcomes, it does not like to let go. Standing there, I realized Dominic wasn't thinking about tonight. He was already calculating the next week, the next move, the long game that would keep Noah alive. And I didn't yet know what he would ask me to pay for it in return. Morning should have felt like relief. But inside Dominic Moretti's safe house, the air stayed braced, like the building was holding its breath. The first night, I barely slept. Doors sealed with soft clicks. Footsteps moved with purpose, but never ran. By daylight, the place ran on routines that looked almost gentle. Coffee, clean towels, a medic who checked Noah's breathing without drama. Noah accepted pancakes and a cartoon. I was the one who kept tasting metal. The comfort came wrapped in a pattern I couldn't ignore. Guards shifted the instant Dominic entered a corridor. Not toward him, but toward me and my son. A man at the gate straightened when Dominic's eyes flicked to Noah, like a signal passed without words. Phones went silent when I walked into rooms. Conversations paused and restarted only after I left. Even Tessa, glued to my side, watched corners with narrowed eyes. It wasn't fear of me. It was awareness of what I had become. Dominic's attention didn't feel romantic. It felt precise. He checked exits before he checked faces. He kept space, but he never lost track of where I stood, like he was protecting a coordinate. When Noah finally napped, curled under a blanket too big for him, I found my phone again. The screen was spiderwebbed from the wedding day. I stared at the cracks and realized I still hadn't cried. I had only moved from crisis to crisis. Dominic appeared in the doorway without sound. He didn't ask permission. He didn't take the phone from my hand. He set a small repair kit on the dresser and stepped close only long enough to steady my wrist while I pressed on a new screen protector. The touch was brief, almost clinical, but it landed in my chest anyway. A glass of water appeared within reach. Noah's inhaler pouch was shifted to the top of my bag. The broken zipper pull was replaced with a new one. That was the dangerous part. Not the cameras, not the gates, the tenderness. A few hours later, the house proved it. A security lead brought Dominic a tablet, and the room tightened before anyone moved. A guard lowered a shade. Tessa's hand closed around my wrist, warning me without words. On the screen was a photo taken from far away, outside the property line, zoomed through trees. It caught me in profile by the kitchen doorway, hair messy, Noah's small hand wrapped around my sleeve. Grainy or not, the point was surgical. Someone wanted Dominic to know they could see what he was keeping. Then came an intercepted message, caught before it reached him. It wasn't violent. It read like a polished memo, clinical and calm, listing leverage like inventory. It referenced the child. It referenced me. It implied time, pressure, and consequences if Dominic didn't correct his position. My skin went cold. In my chest, fear settled like wet concrete, heavy. Thomas called during the scramble. Updates filtered through his people. He wanted to extract us, to return to lawyers and clean battles. But even my father sounded like he knew this was outside corporate reach. Tessa paced, reading the room the way she always reads men. Find what they love, then squeeze. I stared at Noah sleeping, mouth open, trusting the air to keep coming. I had thought love was a promise. In Dominic's world, attachment was a signal flare. And I understood, with a clarity that hurt, that if Dominic cared about me even a little, it made me useful to his enemies. The softness that fixed a zipper could become the reason someone aimed at my child. I had been a front once. I had been a transaction once. I would not be a bargaining chip again. I rose quietly and went to find Dominic, already shaping the boundaries I needed to draw before protection became another kind of trap. The fallout didn't unfold like a movie. It unfolded like paperwork with teeth. By the next morning, my father's world had swallowed the scandal and spit it back out as action. I watched Thomas Dawson turn a ruined ceremony into injunctions and a PR plan, while Dawson Media froze every agreement tied to Grant Whitmore, flagged every proxy clause he had pushed for, and locked down access like we were already under attack. Grant tried to pivot, acting like concern could overwrite recorded facts. But charm doesn't beat timestamps. It doesn't beat a call file saved to the cloud. It doesn't beat lawyers reading the word fraud in calm voices. The clearest image of his downfall wasn't a punch or a scream. It was daylight. It was a security escort walking him out of a glass lobby, his suit still perfect, his face already cracking, while a courier slid a thick envelope into his hand like a receipt. Later, scrolling with numb fingers, I saw a headline that felt almost gentle in its cruelty. His investors had backed away, and his name had become a liability. That same afternoon, I signed the filing to halt the prenup addendum and block any transfer of voting rights. My hand didn't shake until the pen left the paper. The takeover died there, on a legal pad, not in my chest. For the first time, Sophia Vale fell differently. She was the one who understood systems, who helped build the trap with clean language and plausible deniability. My father's team found her fingerprints in drafts, emails, and a term sheet that called my life a front. A subpoena landed. A board vote cut off her contracts. The people who used to answer her calls stopped answering. Dominic Moretti didn't fix everything. Corporate power did most of the heavy lifting. But Dominic made the difference in the blind spots where polite rules end. He traced the message that mentioned Noah back to men who never put their names on anything. And pressure arrived where it needed to arrive, without my father having to light the whole world on fire. Still, the twist stayed true. Being close to Dominic painted a target on me and my son. So I set my first rule, and I set it with my whole body. Noah was not a bargaining chip. Not for Grant's desperation. Not for my father's legacy. Not for Dominic's world. Not even for my own fear. I expected resistance. Instead, I watched Dominic respect it through action. He adjusted security so it surrounded us at a distance, not at my elbow. He offered routes instead of orders. He kept Tessa beside me. The cage didn't disappear, but the door stopped feeling locked from the outside. Weeks turned into a couple of months, and the days began to look normal in small, stubborn ways. I walked Noah to school with his inhaler pouch clipped where I could see it. I started therapy and a support group and kept the details private, because healing doesn't need an audience. I learned to say the truth out loud. I am tired of performing safety. Work came back on my terms. I didn't return as a bride or a headline. I returned as Claire Dawson, building a small project through Dawson Media focused on women's safety and media ethics, the kind that teaches you what to do when someone tries to control your story. One morning, Noah dumped cereal across the counter and laughed. Tessa groaned like the world had ended, then helped me clean it. I laughed too, surprised by the sound. Dominic stayed in the edges of my life, present but not claiming. Sometimes I noticed a car at a distance. Sometimes a new lock appeared. He gave me options, and that was the first kind of protection that didn't taste like a lie. Here's what I learned at Cedar Hollow Vineyard. Power is not control. Power is choosing truth when a performance would be easier. Love is not a fairy tale. Love is what remains when the stage lights die and someone still shows up. I chose myself. I chose my child. I chose a life where I don't have to earn safety by staying quiet. If you were in my place, what would you have done at that altar? Would you have run, or would you have made the truth echo? Tell me in the comments, and if this story hit you, please like, share, comment, and subscribe.